Welcome, everybody, to episode 9 of Circle of Fellows, that monthly gathering of 4 fellows from the International Association of Business Communicators, IABC, and myself to tackle one topic in some depth. And starting this month, we're aligning the topics we discuss with those that have been selected by IABC's editorial board. So it's also the theme in communication world and some other IABC content. And this month, the theme is creativity and innovation. And that's an interesting topic because as communicators, I think we all strive to be creative. Certainly we don't want to be mundane, routine, and boring. But in the corporate world, this can sometimes be difficult. I remember Don Ranley, he's an IABC fellow as well, professor of journalism at the University of Missouri, and regular speaker and consultant on writing for corporate publications and for corporate purposes, saying that at some point everybody who works in organizational communication stops writing to their audience and starts writing to their bosses. And I find that to be really true. After you've been edited and approved by the lawyers and you've been through multiple rounds of revisions, you just get into the habit of anticipating how they're going to sort of flatten the content and just anticipate that and do it ourselves, and something important to resist. But we have a terrific panel of fellows today to talk about creativity and innovation, and I think we should go around and have them introduce themselves. And speaking of creativity and innovation, Pixie Emslie is a novelist. That's quite a departure from corporate communications. How you doing, Pixie?
Hi. It is a bit of a break from corporate communication. My background was that I started as a journalist on South African newspapers. Then I worked on magazines in the UK before coming back to the Star newspaper. After newspapers, I decided that corporate communication was going to be the way to go. And I was really lucky because I was snapped up, if you could say so, by one of our biggest mining houses. And the person there was a member of IABC. So that's where I also started my relationship with IABC. I worked in corporate communications for a number of years before starting my own consultancy. I specialized in employee communications, so I dealt with our trade unions and our employees across the board in huge numbers. It was really exciting years. And now my husband and I are retired, if you like, from corporate communication, and I've spent my time writing. I've one book published and another one in the process, so yeah, that's where I am at the moment.
Great. And I think the book that you have published, or the one that's coming, or maybe both, are murder mysteries, right?
The first one was. The second one is probably not really worthy of that kind of title because it's more of a love story.
Ah, okay, great. Well, looking forward to those. Also from Mexico City, Leticia Narvaez. Hi, Leti.
Hi, Shel. How are you? Good morning.
Great. For those who don't know you, who may be watching, give us a little background.
Yes, of course. Well, I started with IABC, I think, 30 years ago. I was working at that time at Ford Motor Company. I was starting my communication career there. And from then on, I have been working for different companies, always on business communication, social responsibility, reputation, crisis management. And 4 years ago, I started my own consulting firm on communication. I give a lot of training on effective communication, ethical practices within the organization. And I really love it. So I've been participating with IABC for a long time, and I'm very proud to be a fellow now. So nice to see you all.
Great to see you, too. Next up, John Gerstner. Hey, John.
Hey, Shel. How are you?
I'm excellent.
Well, I guess I could speak a little bit about my background in internal communications, which has been my specialty. I worked a number of years for John Deere, more recently for Florida Blue. I co-founded Communitelligence, which is an online portal for corporate communication training. And I think I would say my career has been focused on creativity. Actually, I would say it's been built around that, and everything I've tried to do has been to innovate on processes and channels, everything from an intranet to a corporate magazine to town hall meetings to video programs, on and on. I really believe creativity is super important for our field, and I know many communicators are very excellent innovators.
Great, and I have a question later for you, John, about creativity exercised in a project you were responsible for at Deere. But before we do that, let's finish up our introductions with Mark Schumann.
Hey there. Thank you so much, Shel, for this topic this month, because it is so essential to what we do. Next week marks my 38th anniversary of joining IABC. I was among the first who were part of the elementary school recruitment program. And during those years, creativity has been certainly an essential part of my work and something that I always tried to pursue. I spent most of my career at Towers Perrin, where as consultants in the HR space, we often had the least interesting topics to have to help people understand. And so it was a serious matter all those years to find the heart of the issue, the heart of the problem, and the heart of the people we were trying to reach, and to think of every possible way to do that. And I love the idea of pursuing our creative muscles outside of our profession. And I don't write murder mysteries, but for the last 20 years I've been a working, practicing movie critic. And that keeps those muscles sharp when regular work doesn't necessarily offer the opportunity.
And your experience at Towers Perrin, I had similar experience at William M. Mercer and Alexander & Alexander. A lot of that is benefits communication.
Yep.
Benefits enrollments, 401k, which is a saving mechanism here in the U.S., and flexible spending accounts and things like that, which are pretty detail-laden and bureaucratic, and can be really difficult to get employees to pay attention, even though, for the year following the enrollment, they're going to be stuck with what they've selected. That can be a real challenge, getting people to pay attention to that.
It can be, but one of the things that I think marks the best of that work, and certainly next week when people gather in New Orleans and they see the Gold Quill winners, and they will see some very creative work in the benefit communications area. We're reaching real people, and real people who in the other hours of their days are most responding to those messages and those approaches that have been well thought out from a creative point of view. So I never let the nature of the content become an excuse for not being creative, for not keeping it fresh. I always felt that you have to refresh yourself, you have to reflect on, are you letting things get a bit tired, and when it gets tired you have to do some reinvention so that you're always finding the best way to solve the problem. It's all about the problem, it's all about the audience, and what is the new way to do it. And so over the years we tried everything from musicals about benefits to almost murder mysteries about benefits, to all kinds of things. The only thing I never got to do was an entire benefits book in verse, and no one ever went for that idea.
In iambic pentameter, huh?
Yeah.
Just to anybody who's watching, the Q&A is open over on the right-hand side of the page. Please feel free to hit us with your questions. We'll address those as we move along. But the first thing I'd like to talk about is the challenge of being creative in a corporate environment. You're dealing with CEOs and C-suite executives and lawyers and HR executives who probably, a lot of them don't see I don't know if it's a question of seeing the value of creativity. It's just that they see a world in which things need to be corporate. Probably has to do with the way they came up through the organization and the fact that this is work and not fun. I remember I was involved in a change initiative at a company where I was working, pharmaceutical company, and as I delivered the plan for communicating about the change to the C-suite, the chief financial officer said, just do a special edition of the company magazine. You know, employees get paid to come in here and work, and they should damn well read it. How do you get past that mentality and get leadership to embrace the idea that if we want employees to pay attention, we need to employ some of these creative practices?
One thing is, I think we have to be careful. I think we have to make certain that our approach to creativity fits within the context of the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think that sometimes if we make creativity the issue rather than solving the problem the issue, we work against ourselves. In my Towers Perrin years, I used to sometimes say to people, this is a business, not an art colony. And we have to remember that we're working in a business and that we're solving a business issue. When we approach creativity through the lens of the business and through the lens of the problem we're solving for the business, that gives us the structure, the boundaries for wonderful creativity. If we begin with how we're solving the problem, and if we demonstrate how the approach will solve the problem, then we get the permission to go off in the direction we want to go.
Shel, I also believe that it's very important to make the management team aware that if we really want to make a difference, it would be key to involve the employees and to listen to them, to listen what they have to contribute to the company. They are the ones who really know their function, their specialization, and they can suggest a lot of good ideas. Sometimes they do not do it because they are afraid of retaliation and of that maybe sometimes we ignore them because we believe we own the truth. But if we really want to make the difference versus other companies, versus the competition, why don't we listen to them and foster and really promote to listen to their innovations and their creativity and their new ideas?
How do you go about doing that listening, Letty? Are there channels where you can request ideas from employees? Are you listening in on the enterprise social network? How do you tap into that creativity in the employee base?
Yes, I believe there are many communication channels that we have. If we really have an effective communication plan, it's very important, of course, to know our audiences, especially now. For example, we have to be aware that we have a lot of different segmentation within our audience. For example, the Millennials generation now, they are very different from the baby boomers or the X generation, and there are many differences in which they want to express what they really think. So also we have to define different communication channels according to our audience. But we can do a lot of communication in order to listen and to get the feedback from all of them in different ways, no? Even in town hall meetings, in focus groups, also in digital and a lot of social networks that we can have inside a company in order to listen. And of course, to promote this with the management team, to promote that they listen to their own groups and to their own teams in order to get innovating ideas.
You know,
go ahead, Pixie.
I could follow on. One of the things to follow on to what Leticia is saying is my experience was one gets enormous innovation and creativity. People want to be creative, but you have to get the support from the top. An example we had is we were trying to improve customer services in our electricity utility. It's a very big corporation. And I don't know what made us think of it, but we created an art competition. And the only way we could think to get everyone to come into it was to get the chairman himself to kick it off. Well, it was quite fun, of course, but we did manage to get the chairman to wear a T-shirt and to paint across the board with his paintbrush and get it going. But what we hadn't expected was the enormous response from the entire corporation. Not only did we get paintings, We got sculptures and artwork and beads and poems and songs. It was the most extraordinary thing. Our biggest problem was how to deal with the reaction we had, which shows that, to me, that people, even in a huge company like that, really wanted to be part of it. And it started from the top. And I think that was the key, is you have to, if you haven't got the buy-in from the very top, and that applies, it applies in countries and companies and small groups, even in tiny companies. So I think what Leticia's saying was really, really right. You have to get that buy-in somewhere, and it can be fantastic.
And I think, Shel, that buy-in begins with the content and the degree to which the people we're trying to reach will understand the content, believe in the content, and then do what the content should lead them to do. And I think when we begin with the content and what it's going to take for people to absorb the content, that is where we are the most reasonable, logical, and credible when we try to sell more creative ideas. Where we get in our own way is when we talk about creativity for its own sake and it's not solving the problem. And what I love about the nature of this discussion is this is all about solving problems. And when we're solving the problem, that gives us the permission to create.
Yeah. I think sometimes doing something innovative or different can serve to promote the idea of job satisfaction without addressing a specific objective. I remember when I was working as director of corporate communications at one company, I had an employee on the internal communication staff, and she was bound and determined to have an ugly tie contest at the company headquarters. And I kept saying, I don't know if we want to commit our resources to that. I'm not sure what problem it solves. We have other bigger issues to deal with. But she kept at it, and I finally said, okay, you know what? It couldn't hurt. So I let her run it, and we had, I think, 6 members of the C-suite enter ugly ties. There were probably 500 ugly ties on tables out in the courtyard area at the corporate headquarters. Thousands of employees came out and looked and laughed and cast their votes. And I think what it did was it set a tone. It had some sort of small influence on the culture that said this kind of thing is okay at what is typically a very staid pharma company.
Right, that's wonderful.
That reminds me of a recipe contest we once ran at John Deere and received recipes from around the globe, being a global organization, and it actually turned out to be quite a useful and well-received cookbook. But I think we're really talking a lot about culture as we think about creativity and how important it is today to open the doors to creativity to all employees. And this myth that only certain people are creative, I think, really needs to be dispelled. Yeah. And any way that communicators can make that a purposeful point that we want all employees to contribute their ideas and creativity. And we do have, I think, great digital channels to do that through enterprise social networks and blogs and identified applications just for creative ideas. There's a lot of opportunity today that we didn't have 20 years ago.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think that works best when the creative idea sponsors the spontaneity. And your description of the recipes takes me back to, I was very lucky to work with Southwest Airlines for 25 years. And we now take Southwest for granted and their portrayal of fun in the workplace. But in the early years, when that was still kind of an embryonic notion, somehow we got the idea to create a karaoke musical where we made it very easy for Southwest people, most of them non-singers, to stretch their performing muscles in the karaoke musical. And I can't remember what it was about, but it was something about boring details that demanded musical treatment. It became such a piece of the culture because it enabled them to shine in ways they had never expected. And it was just one of those spontaneous moments that fortunately we recorded. I think when we give people the opportunity to spontaneously connect, then it's something that seals that cultural moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking of Deloitte, and this has to be 9 or 10 years ago now, where they had a budget for producing a recruiting video, and they were going down the path of a typical recruiting video with a production company and a script and actors, when somebody said, well, why don't we let employees create recruiting videos? And they shifted the budget to buying inexpensive, you remember those...
flip cams.
Yeah, the flip cam, before every phone had a camera.
Right.
They bought a bunch of those and editing suites, and any employee could check out the camera and an editing suite. And they ended up getting, I think it was hundreds of submissions. A lot of them were just talking heads, but some of them actually wrote scripts and did productions. They mounted them on an internal video server so employees in North America could vote for their favorites, and the top, I don't remember how many it was, 15 or 20, are still on a YouTube channel called the Deloitte Film Festival. And some of them are just wonderful. I used to show one called the Blue Dot, the Green Dot, that I thought was just terrific and really demonstrated the kind of engagement that employees feel at Deloitte. So I want to talk a little bit about live events, because I think, if you're trying to introduce the idea of creativity and innovation in an organization, doing something that's committed to video or committed to print that can rise up 10 years later and become uncomfortable if it didn't work right, if it went sideways, might be an inhibitor to some leaders. But a live internal event, I think, is an opportunity to start to break through. We talked about the ugly tie contest. I remember when I went to work for one company, their quarterly manager meetings were the driest things I'd ever seen in my life. By the time I left, the last quarterly managers meeting had the president of the company and the president of one of the business units coming out as the Blues Brothers at the opening and doing a song and dance to lyrics that talked about the last quarter's performance and had everybody on their feet. Do you find that live events really are that kind of entree into breaking through the boredom of most corporate communications?
Yes, I truly believe that. I remember we made something like that when I worked for a pharmaceutical company also, and we were trying to change. There were many changes in the strategic plan, and there was part of a new culture that we wanted to foster. So we had this town hall meeting with all the management team there, and normally each of them would present their new objectives, other plan for the year, and everybody was listening to that. And what we did is that we had like a scenario, like big house, because the main slogan of the campaign was that it was like a new home for the employees. And this was like a house, and then the managers came out of the window or of the door or from the garden, and each one spoke about their own message. So the scenario we had like very special. It was like a theater, like a play, like a play we did, and people also was laughing because they had never seen something like that. Normally, the culture was that everything was a protocol and was very serious, and the directors were very formal on presenting their own objectives. So the way they did it and the way they asked people to ask questions, it was like very different, and it provided like a different tone, I think, to what we were trying to communicate.
Great. And just I want to mention we have a question from a viewer that is a digression from our topic. So I want to promise Brian we will get to it toward the end of the broadcast, but to maintain our momentum on creativity and innovation, we're going to plow right on ahead and talk about, John, the history book that you developed while you were at Deere. As I recall, you were planning to leave your internal communications position, and they said, well, rather than leave, how would you like this project?
Yes.
Do I remember that right?
You do, and what a project it was. Excuse me. It turned out to take about 2 years, and we totally tore up the idea of the state and history book with multiple pages of text. I worked with a great designer, Michael McMillan, in Chicago, and we came back to our CEO, who had requested the book, with the layout of a coffee table corporate history book. And I remember presenting him the layouts in the conference room, and he said, "This looks great. Where's all the text?" And we had a little explanation that, no, we want to do this through visuals primarily. We had a great year archive, and we wanted to mine that for the visuals. And we came back with a concept of producing the book on values. And what are the John Deere values? Well, no one had ever identified those. So that became a major part of the book itself. We did focus groups to arrive at the 4 values. We devoted each of those to a chapter of the book, and we also pulled out all the stops and printed the name of every employee and retiree in the company, 75,000 plus worldwide, which was a huge administrative task, but we did it and didn't get any complaints that we left someone out. So. And then the ultimate, I think, thing we did creatively on the book was we didn't just give it away. We put it on Amazon. We published it as a for-profit book and sold it through our dealers and all online channels. And so instead of a cost, it became a profit center for the company. So great challenging opportunity for me. I still look back fondly on that experience.
Yeah, I did a little research on this topic. I found one study, Rachel Miller in the UK wrote about this, that found 93% of communications professionals acknowledge the importance of creativity in internal communications, and 6% think that they're using their creativity to its full potential on the job. What's holding people back? Is it just too much to do, and I've got so many things to get out there that I'm just going to take the easy approach? What's the obstacle, do you think?
Shel, I think sometimes we let ourselves get in the way of ourselves. And I find that, and having talked about this topic and written about it for years, I think we are so caught up, rightly so, in solving the problems we have to solve, addressing the requests that we have to fulfill, chasing those opportunities, that we don't necessarily give ourselves time to simply let ideas fester. Because creativity, it's kind of like the stand-up comic who someone looks at them and says, be funny. Creative people can't just say, okay, now I have to be creative. We have to give ourselves the time to let everything that is swimming around about the challenge, the problem, fester, so that we might think of the less than obvious approach. But that takes time. And so we do have to structure ourselves and schedule ourselves for that walk in the woods, as I used to tell people I worked with, to give ourselves the chance to just let the apple hit us in the head.
I would also say that it's hard and it's risky to go against the grain, and that keeps a lot of us corralled. It really requires stepping out and asking some serious questions about what the goal is here, what does the business need, and really fighting for that creativity, that solution that is outside the box is not easy. And I think that, in a busy world we all live in, that sometimes trips us up.
One of the things that comes up with that is that I think we don't always look at our audience enough. In our country, which is a multilingual country, and I think most of us in IABC are from multilingual countries, although not everyone, is one of the things that was enormously important, and actually turns out, I don't think it's too difficult, is to identify several things about your audience, your employees. And if you're dealing with external communication, the same would actually apply, but internally, is to see what language, A, they speak at home, because they're probably speaking a different language at work, and B, what language they read in. And we found some fascinating answers to that. So if you're producing a publication in a multi-language company, and it's a little bit like what John was saying and Mark, that you need to really look with some intensity in order for your people to be creative and to react creatively. They need to feel comfortable in their own languages. What we found in various places was that actually at work, people are speaking probably English, first language in our country, but at home they might be speaking a different language, and they might be more comfortable reading in a third different language, the one they might have learned at school. So your videos, and nowadays, I mean, I'm talking when we did printed word and videos, we used to produce a corporate video news, and we put that into 4 languages every week, which was a major problem in those days. But now I think it's, I don't know if it's easier, but it certainly has more opportunities with the modern social media. And there are normally people on one staff if you are a multilingual country. And then you find people will write with more creativity in the sense that they can appreciate what you're saying more easily than the formal jargon and kind of language that comes from management in a language which they perceive perhaps as the work language. We've had some, I can come back to that later, we've done some quite interesting projects in that which have elicited very interesting reaction and creativity in turn from the staff.
You raise a couple of interesting ideas, Pixie. First, I remember the great Ed Robertson, who ran internal communications at FedEx, came up with sort of a communications version of Maslow's hierarchy, and the very bottom was logistics. And if you're delivering content to people in the wrong language that they're not going to pay attention to, that's a logistical failure. And the second tier was attention. And I think attention is where the creativity comes in. That's where they're going to, take a look at it. And above that is then relevance and then, behavior change. But the other thing is that where people are speaking multiple language, we find that in digital and social media today, visual communication is addressing the issue of language because we don't need to speak the same language to look at images and data visualization and things like that. And I don't see much of that happening on the corporate communication side, more on the marketing side.
But actually, it's funny because I think that this whole idea that all ideas kind of come around in a circle. Right as you were describing the picture book, I was thinking back to a picture book once done about benefits. And you think about benefits and you think about all the pictures, some appropriate for publication and some not, that can tell the benefit story. And it was not done because it was some of the current challenges that might be appropriate for, but it was done in a situation where fundamental literacy in this organization was very low. There was once the comic book at Texas Instruments, one of the real famous little tweaks about benefit communication. I think one of the things, Shel, is sometimes we may think creativity is this really big thing, and we don't have the room for whatever reason to conquer a big thing. Creativity happens in small moments. It can be as small as the way that I tweak a sentence that isn't the typical tweak. It might be the way that a story opens. It might be the way that, especially now with all the different uses of different kinds of media, that we take the story and segment it and sequence it. And so we also need to realize that it can happen in small moments. It doesn't have to be a widescreen extravaganza or a parade. Although a parade's fun.
Well, I want to share a video because you raise a point, Mark, about the widescreen big production, and I saw a video. This was from Denver Water. This is a utility. Some of the most dry communications I've ever seen have come out of a utility, but they've taken a cue from YouTube. And this was a video that they produced. It was, I believe it was produced for internal communications, but ended up being used externally. And it's not an expensive production by any stretch of the imagination, but very effective. So I'm going to go ahead.
We've lost our sound.
Let me figure out why that's happening. Sorry about that. I thought I had tested this.
Well, we can all break into song to
Yeah, and dance.
Sometimes necessity is the great prompt for creativity. You know, when you were mentioning video, Shel, years ago, when I was at Towers Perrin, we had some very dry benefits information to communicate about flexible benefits back when that was new. And there's nothing more difficult than trying to reach an audience that thinks they know everything about benefits with a message about benefits. And so we went to our folks and we did some really serious qualitative research about just how arrogant are you about this information that we're trying to reach you with, and we ended up turning that finding from our audience into what still is one of the you know, those great projects you get to work on, a Broadway musical of about 12 minutes of biting benefits humor about what it takes for arrogant people to realize they need to pay attention to. So sometimes if you focus most on the problem, you find all kinds of solutions.
Right. Well, rather than try to play this and sit here and mess with the technology on it, what I should do is just tell you what it was. As I say, this was Denver Water, and they have these vaults that have the pipes that control the flow of the water. And a lot of employees have been asking, you know, what these are. I guess they'd been getting the same question from externally. So they did it as a Twilight Zone episode with a guy as the Rod Serling character saying they're going to go into the mysterious deep recesses we may never come back. And you've got the guy in the hard hat and the safety vest going, no, it's not really that dangerous. It's not really that mysterious. All we do here is it gets the same information across that a typical article that nobody would have read would have done in a way that just grabbed everybody's attention. I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it's a matter of you know, part of it is looking at what is happening creatively outside the organization and saying what can we do here?
Yes, and I think also that let's be realistic. We need to be within an organization that is open to acknowledge innovation and creative ideas. And maybe something that we should also do is like to work on the main objectives and the performance reviews, so that within the objectives of the employees, creativity and innovation is also rewarded and acknowledged. Because maybe people have a lot of new ideas and they want to be creative, but when they have their performance review, their supervisor says, well, yes, but this is not within your original objectives, no? Mm-hmm. So I think we should also work on that area in order for the employees to know that if they bring a new idea to improve different processes or different things around the company, that they would be heard, they would be rewarded, they would have more visibility, because something else that we know about the new generations is that they want to be visible, they want to have power, and they want to be part of the decision-making process. So that if we recognize that within the millennials, for example, we will be fostering more innovation and more creativity.
Right. Yeah, and I think another opportunity, and I talked about looking at what's happening outside the organization. I think digital and social media present us with some opportunities. This is how people are getting their information and their messages when they're not at work. I'm reminded of the whole Ebola outbreak, and as Ebola started to come to the U.S., there was a lot of panic and a lot of fear, and you had organizations like the Centers for Disease Control and others saying, look, you know, the circumstances, the conditions, the culture here are such that we're really not going to see the problems that we've seen in Western Africa. You know, people don't touch corpses in the United States. But the fear was pretty serious anyway. It led to some interesting and negative bureaucratic decisions, like the quarantining of a nurse. But where I saw it die down was when a meme spread. And I don't know who created it, but it was a picture of Kim Kardashian, right? And in the big block letter type, it said, more Americans have been married to Kim Kardashian than have died from Ebola. And this thing went viral, and I don't know if it was just Ebola weariness at that point at the same time, coincidentally, or if that graphic had anything to do with it, but things seem to quiet down, and you know, you don't see a lot of organizations using memes to communicate a message, and certainly not to communicate data, but you know, my question is, why not?
That's good.
I wonder if it is perhaps a factor of the age of management, that if you've got younger managers who are happy to take a lead, and it's back to what I was saying, is to get by and you have to get it in from the top. If you've got older people at the top, they are still perhaps like at my age a bit nervous of social media. I'd be a bit nervous of putting things out there, and you know, you see that people putting things out there without really thinking because it's so quick and taken up the wrong way. It's to me still a bit of a minefield, if you like.
But I think that's an opportunity for us, and it's an important part of being in this profession. I always laugh and say we've had social media since the caveman days, only then they etched on stone walls. But we've had it forever. And it's just now it's faster and it's easier. But we've had the experience of people socializing over issues since time began. I think part of our job is to prepare whoever we work for a foundation of knowledge of the audience so that when we come in with the creative idea, we aren't starting from scratch. We make the ongoing education about who we are trying to reach such an important priority that when push comes to shove and we say, you know, we could do it this way and achieve this, we're not, again, trying to accomplish everything within the context of that idea.
I wonder if some communicators underestimate the impact that they have on their company's climate for creativity. It is so important how things are communicated, and there's a tone that is being set in every communication, whether formal or informal. And I'm afraid that when we send out a formal, bureaucratic message, it really is just putting in concrete this idea that we're a very conservative, staid organization, not too open to new ideas, and that's really critical in the future of an organization.
That is so important because it creates distance, and we're all about removing distance. I was working just a few months ago with a company in the oil and gas business, and as we know, until yesterday, the news has been really bad in the oil and gas business. And they wanted to create a message that was pretty typical, that had all the standard phrases and all this. And we said, you know, let's just cut through that and say, it's a whole lot more fun when we make money than when we lose money. And because, you know what, that's the truth. And so sometimes I think that we make this discussion of creativity perhaps more complicated than it needs to be. If we start with the truth and then think about all the ways to reach the truth, that may give us the freedom to both think of the creative idea and also to help people understand its value.
Yeah, and John, you led me to think about all the effort and money that is spent and programs that are implemented in order to boost engagement in organizations. And today, with the millennial generation, which is the dominant demographic in the workplace and in fact in the we know that they tend to change jobs pretty frequently, and retaining your top talent is important. And what resonates with millennials, I think, as organizations look at the cost of replacing employees and the cost of losing their top talent, that could be a case for doing things differently. I hate to use the cliche, but getting outside the box.
Definitely.
Okay. As long as we're down to 15 minutes, why don't we digress? Anybody who's watching, I'll let you know that you can pose a question over on the right-hand side of the screen. And we got one. As I said, this is off topic, but let me throw it out there anyway. I'll read it to you verbatim. What IABC leaders by name have made serious efforts, and please describe some, to evangelize the importance of professional communications with the goal of converting CEOs away from thinking communications as a waste of time and money? And I guess we can tie this back to creativity and innovation, because sometimes doing something creatively costs a little more than simply posting another article to the intranet. Go ahead, Pixie.
I'd cut with that a little bit. The late Dick Charlton, who was also a fellow of IABC, I'm sure some of you remember Dick, was at Parker Hannifin. And one of the things that he did, and that I really think he did answer this question in the sense of changing his CEO, is he persuaded them to let him literally go around the world. It was a global company, and take photographs. And he went around once a year and he took photographs of different branches, companies around the world that were part of Parker Hannifin. And they made a calendar with these pictures, which became sort of famous, a bit like the Pirelli calendar, if you're aware of that. And it became something that was really precious. And the CEO wanted to have his own picture, from what I gather, on the calendar, but he didn't qualify because he wouldn't quite make the grade in the photographs. But Dick used to tell the story, and of course it became it wasn't an expensive thing to do. But certainly I think that's perhaps a good example to answer your question as a question of an actual person who's done that.
Yeah, I think, Shel, it's such a part of the DNA of this association to try to educate people about the value of our profession. I think that each of us has an opportunity to do that, no matter who we're working with. I find that discussion is more effective if, in fact, it's not about communication. If communication is positioned as a means to an end, and the end is all about the relationships that the individual or the organization must maintain with the stakeholders who make a difference to the business. If we educate our constituents about the importance of relationships, and they buy into the importance of those relationships, and then use that as the door to open to the discussion of different approaches to communicating, I find it's a much different discussion than if I begin and end with the importance of communication. I think a thought any of us could, no matter what conversation we're having.
Yeah. I was going to throw into the mix here with the question. If I had some time, I could probably come up with a list of 50 IABC leaders over the last years who have done a great job of evangelizing this. But I think the point is that it's been going on over the years, and not just through IABC, but PRSA and CPRS and the Chartered Institute of Public Relations and you know, the Global Alliance, and you name it. I don't run into that many leaders anymore who think that communication is a waste of money. Certainly when I got into this business in the mid-'70s, more leaders than not, you know, when budgets got tight, communication was one of the first things to get cut. You know, budgets were very tight for communication, and in some organizations it was being done by an admin and not a professional. I run into very little of that anymore, and I think part of the reason, in addition to the evangelizing that the professional community has been engaged in, is the fact that the leadership of a lot of organizations now have come up through organizations where communication was important, and they sort of, you know, just inherently recognize that you need to do this, that it's not optional.
I would add another reason is social media has taken the cloak away from all organizations, and they are all vulnerable and can be on the nightly news in an instant. And just that fear factor alone, I think, is causing upper executives to make sure they are positioned well with communication expertise to answer those challenges.
Yeah, we just, in fact, had a program last night, the New York chapter of IABC, on, for lack of better description, preventive maintenance that we can apply to many communication crises. And the more that we are prepared for the executives internalizing the communication need beforehand gives us the best chance if something happens. I think, Shel, I agree. I don't hear the budget constraint as much today as a misguided idea that it's really easy to communicate now, because all I have to do is pick up a telephone and I can talk to anyone, I can write anything, I can shoot anything. And so many times there is the effort to have to remind people that, you know what, this is still really sensitive, nuanced work that takes time.
Yep. As you can see, Brian's asking again for names of evangelizing through the association, and I suspect this is the wrong group of people to ask. The fellows are not insiders and engaged in that, but it's an interesting question. I certainly know that when I was on the board, there were a lot of members of IABCs, both on staff and the leadership, who were going out and doing talks externally. That would have been people like Marcia Vaughn and Ruta Skelton and Ron Martin, who were getting out in front of other audiences and evangelizing, and I think that's why we're at the point where we are today, where it's taken seriously, along with the recognition of the importance of reputation management at senior levels, which didn't used to be the case, and the correlation between engagement and profitability and return on investment for internal communications. But we do have a question coming back to the creativity issue. Let me throw this up here. Oh, that's the wrong one. Here it is. What ideas do you have to reach out to millennials in the way of communications outside of social media with little to no budget? Jamie works for a nonprofit, historically low budgets there. And outside of those social type channels, whether it's internal social media or external, what do you think about reaching millennials? We've seen so many definitions of millennials and so many characteristics defined for millennials. What do we do to reach them through other channels in the organization?
Now, well, we really know that the job motivation isn't just about money for millennials, but one of the main motivations is to contribute, to have with programs that really benefit society. They are very, very focused on that. And they also want to participate. They want to be taken seriously. They want to be part of the decision-making process. So if we really consider that, I think it's important we can foster their participation, we can listen to their ideas without a lot of budget. I think, but the organization has to be aware of that, has to promote that, and to receive it in a positive way. to really listen and to consider their opinion seriously, to be part of the decisions that are taken, of the strategic plan of the organization.
Yeah, I don't know if Jamie's talking about internal or external audiences, but I know one of the characteristics of millennials that I find most interesting is the fact that they prefer experiences to material stuff, and to deliver an experience.
Right. And they want to be involved. I think that the thing, in fact, this was actually something I was working on yesterday. A very staid company in the finance business, not necessarily the breeding ground for creative thought, but it has a real issue with the millennials in its organization. And as I said, creativity is a bit in the eye of the beholder. They want a creative idea, but they are limited in what they think creativity is. By going to people and by understanding the context of the millennials in that organization, which will vary if they were sitting somewhere else, we learned that what the millennials wanted, just to your point, Shel, is the experience of involvement. And so for virtually no money except the electricity in a conference room, we're going to do a whole series of executive and millennial work sessions where they actually solve real problems. Because what these people are hungry for is the chance to work on something with the people who lead them. That isn't costing money, and it's precisely what these folks are looking for. And we only learned that because we asked them.
Great. Well, we're down to our last 4 minutes, and we don't have any more questions in the queue. So why don't we just go around and maybe talk about what you think the most creative thing you've done in your career, or one that really stands out for you on behalf of a client or an employer. And
I'll throw out one. When I was at John Deere, I formed an annual internal corporate communicators conference. And so we met each year, and usually at headquarters, but one year I decided, let's meet at the University of Iowa, which was nearby. So we spent the day going from classroom to classroom, actually 2 days, hearing professors and other outside experts who we brought in to speak. And for years after, we heard how wonderful it was for people to be able to move around a campus after they're graduated and moved on. Just that experience of being invigorated by the walk between sessions, that was something that stands out in my mind.
Well, the only thing I can think of which was really very creative, and I was only part of a group doing it, was we had a choir competition amongst the mines, and these were really underground workers and hard men, and we said that the winning group would go to the choir competition, which is run annually in Germany, and the winning group had then training. They'd never been on an aeroplane, they had very little knowledge of where they were going, and it was incredible. It transformed the whole company. Everyone followed every single move of these guys who went over. It was terrific. And one of my fellow PR people who could speak German, and she could speak Zulu as it happened, because she'd grown up on a farm in Zululand, went with them, and they protected her as if she was the queen. It was just incredible, and it worked for the whole company. It was great.
What I can think about is a special program I developed when I was at Merck Sharp and Dunn many years ago. It was a health journalism award. At least in Mexico, the journalists on health issues were not very much recognized on the research they made about different diseases. So what we did is we developed this award with the participation of the Ministry of Health and of different universities and other groups. And then we launched the award, and for our surprise, we had almost 300 submissions. It was the first time that this was done in the pharmaceutical sector. and they were very, very happy to be recognized. We did a very good revision of the submissions, and this award became like a very, very different program that persisted for many years. We did it in different ways every year, and every year we had more and more participation. And what the journalists mentioned is that they were not very much recognized within their own media, within their own newspapers or radio, and that they're very happy to be well recognized about sometimes very long, very good research that they made, and that had taken them for many, many months, and that this was a very different way of recognizing their work.
I can throw one out from my time at Mattel in the mid-'80s. When I got there, they had a program called the President's Award. Or I'm taking it back, it was the Chairman's Award. It was pretty lucrative. It was a $25,000 award given to 10 individuals or teams, but they were handed out in private in the chairman's office, and there was a really cheap brochure that was distributed. Now, my view has always been that recognition isn't for the people you're recognizing, it's for everybody else to understand what it takes to get recognized around here. So we made the presentations an all-hands event. We made it very some high production values. The brochure became a very glitzy, themed, multicolor effort with a great designer. But the main thing was that in addition to the check, you got to go to dinner with the executive team in an exotic setting. This was you and your significant other and the executive teams and their significant others. And the last year I was there, we did this where the winners were picked up by limousine in front of the building and driven to a Hollywood soundstage where we had hired people to be paparazzi and autograph seekers down the red carpet, and then it was like a Golden Globe Awards dinner that was videotaped, and then we edited down the video to a 5-minute thing that was presented at the next all-hands meetings. And the idea was, next year, I want that to be me. And it elevated the interest in the award, but it also, I think, based on our post-communication research, seemed to suggest that people really understood what the company does value, recognize, and reward. So, that's one from me.
And actually, Shel, the one I would have to pick is perhaps one of the simplest. And sometimes simplicity is the most wonderful and lasting characteristic of creativity. But the original Frontier Airlines, where I worked for several years, had purchased what we now know as the MD-80, but it was the DC-9 Super 80. And at that point in the 80s, it was the quietest airplane in the air. And so we asked our employees in every possible way they could to pick the quietest seat on the quietest airplane. And they could send in ballots, they could vote with jelly beans, they could vote with money for a charity, they could vote any way they wanted to say, this is what we think the quietest seat in the quietest airplane, meaning it's the quietest seat in the sky. Well, clearly our objective was for people to appreciate that we had these new quiet airplanes. But the amount of energy people put into the debate of where this seat was. So it was seat 13C as validated by the scientists at McDonnell Douglas at the time.
That's excellent. Well, that wraps up this episode. We're out of time. I do want to recognize our 5 new fellows that were just named on the 23rd, and they are Priya Bates, Alice Brink, Mary Hills, Ned Lundquist, and Bish Mukherjee be recognized at the conference next week in New Orleans. And fresh blood for this show, as we'll bring them on to participate. And want to thank Brian Kilgore. As you can see on the screen, he said, as far as most communications goes, this show at this very minute is somewhat creative. No one else is doing it. I appreciate that. We hope to get the technology improved as well. Brian pointed out that I was the only face on the screen. Everybody else was thumbnail. I don't know why, but I was able to go into the control panel and change that. Somehow that ended up being a default setting. So about halfway through, you all got the big screen. But We will be back next week, next month, that is, with another episode 10 of Circle of Fellows, with that month's editorial theme. We'll announce that shortly, along with the participants, and want to thank our panelists, Mark, John, Letty, Pixie. I really appreciate your taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See everybody next month.
Bye.
Bye, Shel.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.